Mafia Boss found his maid locked in the wine cellar. What she heard there saved his family. Why had the maid been locked inside the wine cellar? What secret did she overhear that could protect the Mafia Boss's entire family? Hello, everyone, and welcome to Mercy Behind the Throne, where hidden dangers, quiet courage, and life-changing discoveries come to light. Before we begin, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss another unforgettable story. Thank you for every view, comment, and moment you spend with us. Your support helps our community continue growing and allows these powerful stories to reach more viewers. Tell us in the comments where in the world you are watching from and what time it is there right now. We are grateful to have you here. Now, settle in, listen carefully, and let us step into the opening moments of today's gripping story. He thought the safest room in his mansion was the one buried beneath it, until the woman he had been taught to overlook became the only voice standing between his family and ruin. Naomi Carter pressed both hands against the heavy oak door of the wine cellar, her breath shaking in the cold air as music drifted down from the dining room above. The walls around her were stone, old and damp, stacked from floor to ceiling with bottles worth more than her yearly rent, their dark glass catching tiny strips of light from the vents like watching eyes. Somewhere overhead, crystal glasses chimed. A woman laughed too brightly. A chair scraped across marble. Then came the sound that turned Naomi's fear into something sharper than panic. Dominic Hayes's voice, low and gentle in a way the world never got to hear, said, "Take your medicine, sweetheart." Naomi froze. Her fingers tightened against the door. Lily. 8-year-old Lily Hayes, with her crooked smile, her pink cardigan, and the stuffed rabbit she carried even when her father's men pretended not to notice. Naomi had heard enough through the cellar vent to know that the tiny silver spoon waiting upstairs was not what it seemed. She drew in a breath and shouted with everything she had, but the cellar swallowed her voice. Above her, the piano kept playing, soft and elegant, as if nothing in the house had changed. As if death could arrive dressed in candlelight and still be invited to dinner. Naomi grabbed the brass handle again and pulled until her arms trembled. Locked. Still locked. Caroline Whitman had smiled when she turned the key, the kind of smile rich women used when they wanted cruelty to look like manners. A good maid, Caroline had whispered, should know when to stay quiet. But Naomi could not stay quiet. Not now. Not when Lily's medicine had been mentioned in the same breath as Eleanor Hayes's evening tea. Not when Victor Mallory, the family's trusted advisor, had stood on the other side of that wall and said Dominic would sign anything once the house was grieving. Naomi turned, searching the shadows. Her eyes swept over wine crates, old tools, a silver tasting table, a narrow copper pipe running along the ceiling toward the kitchen. She had cleaned this mansion for 11 months. She knew its sounds better than anyone who owned it. She knew which stairs sighed under weight, which doors clicked before they closed, which pipes carried noise when the house went still. Her pulse hammered as she reached for the metal stand beside the tasting table and dragged it across the floor. The scrape was swallowed by the music. Too soft. She looked up at the copper pipe. Her heart dropped, then rose again. Years ago, before grief turned Dominic Hayes into a man made of silence, Lily used to play hide-and-seek with Naomi near the kitchen pantry. When Lily was scared or stuck, Naomi would tap 3 times so the child could find her. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. Their little secret. Naomi lifted the metal stand with both hands and struck the pipe. Once. Twice. 3 times. The sound rang upward through the bones of the mansion. Then she waited, breath caught in her throat, while above her, Dominic said softly, "Open your mouth, Lily." The 3rd tap climbed through the mansion like a secret trying to survive. In the dining room, no one moved at first. The long table glittered beneath 2 chandeliers, 24 candles burning in perfect lines, silverware polished until it reflected every careful smile. Dominic Hayes held the small amber medicine bottle in one hand and Lily's spoon in the other. His daughter sat beside him in her pink cardigan, swinging her feet above the floor because the chair was still too tall for her. Eleanor Hayes watched from the far end of the table, wrapped in a cream shawl, her tired eyes warm but distant. Victor Mallory sat near Dominic's right hand with a folder beside his plate, his face arranged into the calm expression of a man who had never been caught in anything. Caroline Whitman lifted her wineglass as if the evening belonged to her. Then the sound came again. Tap. 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 It was faint, almost swallowed by the piano, but Dominic heard it. More than heard it, he felt it. His hand stopped before the spoon reached Lily's mouth. Lily looked up, her eyes widening. "Daddy," she whispered, "that is Miss Naomi's knock." The room changed. Not loudly. Not all at once. But something in Dominic's face went still, and when Dominic Hayes went still, grown men forgot how to breathe. Caroline's smile tightened by a fraction. Victor's fingers touched the edge of his folder. "It is probably the pipes," Caroline said lightly. "Old houses make sounds." Dominic did not look at her. His gaze remained on the floor beneath his feet, where another 3 taps answered from somewhere deep below. 12 hours earlier, Naomi Carter had entered that same house through the side door just after 7 in the morning, carrying a brown paper lunch bag and wearing the same black uniform she washed by hand every night in her apartment sink. The Hayes estate stood on 12 fenced acres outside Chicago, all limestone walls, iron gates, and lawns trimmed so clean they looked painted. Naomi had worked there for 11 months, long enough to understand that money did not make a house peaceful. It only made the silence more expensive. She knew when to lower her eyes, when to step aside for men in dark suits, when to pretend she did not hear names spoken behind closed doors. She was not there to judge the Hayes family. She was there to earn enough to keep her younger brother in community college and her mother's prescriptions paid on time. In that house, being invisible was not an insult. It was protection. But Lily never let Naomi stay invisible. The little girl would find her in hallways, kitchens, laundry rooms, anywhere, tugging gently on Naomi's sleeve and asking questions no adult ever seemed brave enough to answer. Why did Grandma look sad after phone calls? Why did Daddy check the windows before he smiled? Why did everyone whisper when Uncle Victor came over? Naomi never told the child more than she should. She simply braided Lily's hair, warmed her soup, placed her stuffed rabbit near her pillow, and tapped 3 times whenever Lily felt scared. That morning, Lily had hugged Naomi around the waist and whispered, "Please stay close tonight." Naomi had smiled down at her and said, "I will be somewhere in this house, baby." She had meant it as comfort. By midnight, it would become a promise. By late afternoon, the Hayes estate had transformed into something polished enough to hide every crack beneath it. White roses filled the entry hall. Gold-rimmed plates lined the dining room table. A private pianist tested soft notes near the windows while the kitchen staff moved with careful speed, carrying trays of roasted vegetables, warm bread, and covered dishes that smelled of butter, rosemary, and expensive patience. Naomi moved through it all with a linen basket against her hip, quiet as a shadow, collecting napkins, straightening chairs, wiping fingerprints from the glass doors that opened toward the back lawn. She had seen rich homes before, but the Hayes mansion was different. It was not built to impress people. It was built to warn them. Every hallway had a camera tucked near the ceiling. Every window reflected a man posted somewhere outside. Even the flowers looked arranged by someone who understood control. Dominic Hayes had made that control his religion. He was 38, tall, broad-shouldered, and pale in the sharp winter light, with dark hair brushed back from a face that rarely softened for anyone outside his bloodline. People in Chicago spoke his name carefully, as if the air itself might carry it back to him. Naomi had watched men twice her age lower their voices when he entered a room. She had watched lawyers close folders too quickly, guests laugh too late, and employees straighten their backs like students called before a principal. But she had also seen him kneel in the hallway to tie Lily's shoe. She had seen him carry Eleanor's tea himself when his mother's hands ached too badly to hold the tray. That was the part of him the world never got to use against him, and the part he guarded most fiercely. At 5 o'clock, Naomi found Lily sitting on the bottom step of the grand staircase with her stuffed rabbit in her lap, watching adults pass by as though she were waiting for a storm to choose a window. "Miss Naomi," she said softly, "do you think Miss Caroline likes me?" Naomi paused with a folded tablecloth in her arms. Across the foyer, Caroline Whitman stood beside a mirror, adjusting a diamond bracelet while speaking to a florist in a voice sweet enough to sound harmless. She was beautiful in the careful way magazine covers were beautiful, all smooth blonde hair, pearl earrings, and a cream dress that did not seem touched by the weather outside. But whenever Lily reached for Dominic, Caroline's eyes changed. Just for a second. Not enough for anyone else to name. Enough for Naomi to remember. Naomi lowered herself beside the child. "Some grown-ups are not good at showing kindness," she said gently. "That does not mean you did anything wrong." Lily nodded, but did not look convinced. From the study doors, Victor Mallory appeared with a leather folder under his arm. He was silver-haired, smooth-faced, and always smiling like a man who had already read the ending. "There is our little princess," he said, bending slightly. Lily moved closer to Naomi without thinking. Victor noticed. So did Caroline. So did Dominic, who had just entered from the West Hall and stopped as the room seemed to tighten around one quiet little girl and the maid who had become her safe place. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Dominic's eyes moved to Naomi, not cold, not warm, but searching, as if he had finally begun to understand that his daughter trusted someone he had never truly seen. Dominic looked away first, but not before Caroline saw the question in his eyes. That was the problem with women like Caroline Whitman. She did not need proof to feel threatened. She only needed a moment, a glance, a child leaning towards someone else. Her smile returned as Dominic crossed the foyer, but it was thinner now, polished over something sharp. "Lily, sweetheart," Caroline said, opening her arms with perfect grace, "come here and let me see your dress." Lily hesitated, her small fingers tightening around Naomi's sleeve. Naomi gently loosened the child's hand because she knew her place in that house, and she knew how quickly kindness could be turned into disrespect when the wrong person was watching. Lily walked to Caroline, but her eyes stayed on Naomi. Caroline smoothed the collar of the girl's dress, then lowered her voice just enough for Naomi to hear. "Children get confused when staff forget boundaries." Naomi's face remained still. She had learned that silence could be armor if you wore it long enough. Dominic's gaze moved between them, and for one brief second, Naomi thought he might say something. Instead, Victor stepped forward with a warm laugh that had no warmth in it. "Family dinners make everyone sentimental," he said. "Tonight should be about unity." Caroline touched Dominic's arm. "Exactly. No distractions." The word landed where she meant it to land. Naomi lowered her eyes, lifted the tablecloth from the stairs, and returned to the dining room. Behind her, Lily whispered, "She is not a distraction." No one answered. In the kitchen, the air was hot and crowded, filled with steam, clattering pans, and the nervous rhythm of staff trying to serve powerful people without becoming part of the evening. Mrs. Alvarez, the house manager, handed Naomi a silver tray of folded napkins. "After these, go downstairs and bring up the 1986 Bordeaux from the private rack. Mr. Hayes requested it for the toast." Naomi paused. The private wine cellar was rarely used during events. Only Dominic, Mrs. Alvarez, Victor, and the security chief had access to that lower level. "Are you sure he asked for me?" Naomi said quietly. Mrs. Alvarez frowned. "The request came through Mr. Mallory. Do not make me ask twice." Naomi nodded, though something inside her tightened. Victor Mallory never noticed the help unless he needed something moved, cleaned, or blamed. She took the brass key card from the hook near the service pantry and made her way down the back staircase, where the house changed with every step. The music softened above. The warmth faded. The marble gave way to sealed concrete, then old stone. At the bottom, the corridor smelled of oak barrels, dust, and cold air. Naomi passed the storage room, the locked archive, the narrow utility hall where copper pipes ran overhead like veins. The wine cellar door opened with a heavy click. Inside, the temperature dropped close to 55 degrees. Rows of bottles slept in perfect darkness, each label written in careful script, each shelf marked by year and region. Naomi found the Bordeaux in the private rack, but as she reached for it, she heard voices through the vent behind the far wall. Victor's voice came first, smooth and low. The child's dose must be given before dessert. Eleanor's tea follows after that. Naomi's hand stopped in midair. Another voice answered, female, controlled, familiar. And Dominic? Victor gave a quiet breath of amusement. Once his daughter is sick and his mother is weak, he will sign whatever we place in front of him. The bottle slipped slightly in Naomi's hand, and the soft tap of glass against wood sounded louder than thunder. On the other side of the wall, the voices stopped. Naomi did not breathe. The bottle rested against the wooden rack, her fingers still wrapped around its neck, her body frozen in the narrow aisle while the cold air pressed through her uniform. On the other side of the wall, silence spread like spilled ink. She could picture Victor Mallory standing in the hidden service room, head tilted, listening. She could picture Caroline beside him, one hand on her bracelet, eyes narrowed in that careful way she had when deciding whether a person was useful or disposable. Naomi eased the bottle back into place one fraction of an inch at a time. The glass made no sound. Her heart did enough for both of them. A man like Dominic Hayes built his house with cameras, guards, locks, and rules, but all of that protection had one weakness. It was designed to stop enemies from outside. It was not designed for betrayal sitting at his own dinner table. Naomi looked toward the cellar door. 20 feet. Maybe 25. If she could reach the corridor, she could climb the service stairs, find Mrs. Alvarez, find Dominic, find anyone who would listen before Lily swallowed what had been prepared for her. Then Victor spoke again, lower this time. "Did you hear something?" Caroline answered after a pause. "Probably one of the staff. They are always where they should not be." Naomi's stomach tightened, but she forced herself to move. One step backward. Then another. Her shoes were soft on the stone floor. Above her, the piano drifted through the vents, gentle and cruel. She was almost at the end of the aisle when Victor's voice returned. "Check the cellar." Naomi turned, scanning the shelves. There was nowhere to hide, not really. The wine racks were open. The tasting table stood in the center. The old barrel alcove near the rear wall was too shallow for safety, but it was shadowed. She slipped behind it, pulling herself tight against the cold stone just as the latch clicked. A slice of hallway light cut across the floor. Caroline stepped in first. Naomi could see the hem of her cream dress, spotless against the gray stone. Victor followed, his polished shoes moving slowly between the racks. "No one here," Caroline said, but she did not sound convinced. Victor walked deeper. Naomi pressed one hand over her mouth. The smell of oak, dust, and old cork filled her nose. She remembered her mother telling her when she was little that fear was allowed to visit, but it was not allowed to drive. Naomi held on to that sentence like a prayer. Victor stopped near the private rack. "The Bordeaux is still here." Caroline's voice sharpened. "Then who made the sound?" Before Victor could answer, the cellar phone mounted near the door buzzed once. He picked it up, listened, then said, "Yes. Bring the child's bottle to the table. Mr. Hayes will give it himself. That makes it cleaner." Naomi closed her eyes. Not from weakness. From understanding. They were not simply planning to harm trust. They were using Dominic's love as the delivery. Victor hung up and turned back toward Caroline. After tonight, he will not be thinking like a boss. He will be thinking like a father. That is when he signs control of the family accounts to the emergency board. Caroline exhaled softly. And Naomi? Naomi's blood went cold at the sound of her own name. Victor gave a small, dismissive laugh. If she becomes a problem, make her look like a thief. Staff with financial troubles are easy for people to believe the worst about. Caroline walked toward the door, then paused. She already is a problem. Naomi tried to step back, but her elbow brushed the old barrel behind her. The faint wooden creak was barely more than a whisper. Caroline turned. Their eyes met across the dark. For 1 second, the cellar held all three of them in a silence so complete that Naomi could hear water moving somewhere inside the walls. Caroline stood near the door, her cream dress glowing faintly in the hallway light, her face calm except for the small hard line at the corner of her mouth. Victor turned slowly, and the smile he wore for boardrooms, bankers, and family dinners disappeared as if someone had lowered a curtain. Naomi stepped out from behind the barrel because hiding no longer mattered. What mattered was the child upstairs. "Mr. Hayes needs to know," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "Lily needs to know." Caroline gave a soft laugh. "Listen to her, Victor. She says his name as if she belongs in the same sentence." Naomi did not look at her. She kept her eyes on Victor. "Whatever you are planning, it is over. I heard enough." Victor studied her the way a man might study a stain on an expensive rug, not with fear, but with irritation that something small had appeared in the wrong place. "You heard sounds through an old vent," he said. "You misunderstood a private conversation." Naomi shook her head. "I heard the child's medicine. I heard Miss Eleanor's tea. I heard the emergency board. I heard you say he would sign anything once he was thinking like a father." Caroline's expression changed then. "Not much. Just enough." Her polished mask stayed in place, but something behind it cracked. Victor inhaled slowly. "That is unfortunate." Naomi moved toward the door. Caroline stepped into her path. "Where are you going?" "To do what nobody in this house is brave enough to do," Naomi said. "Tell him the truth." The words landed harder than she expected. Caroline's eyes flashed, and for the first time that evening, Naomi saw the real woman beneath the pearls and soft perfume. Not elegant. Not gracious. Afraid. "You really think he will believe you?" Caroline asked. A maid with overdue bills, a brother in school, a mother on prescriptions, and access to a private cellar where one bottle costs more than your car? Naomi felt the word strike, but she did not let them bend her. "He does not have to believe me forever. He only has to believe me long enough to check." Victor glanced toward the doorway, calculating. Above them, a faint burst of laughter drifted down from the dining room. Time was moving. Lily was waiting. Naomi tried to step around Caroline, but Victor lifted one hand, not touching her, only signaling enough authority to stop the room. "Caroline," he said, "handle this cleanly." Caroline's smile returned, colder now. She reached to the tasting table and lifted the 1986 Bordeaux, then placed it carefully on the floor near Naomi's shoes. "A missing bottle," she murmured. "A desperate employee. A locked cellar. People will understand the story before you finish denying it." Naomi stared at the bottle, then at Caroline. "You would risk a little girl because you are jealous of who she trusts?" Caroline's face went still. "Do not pretend this is about affection. In houses like this, affection is power." Naomi's voice dropped. "No. Affection is what children reach for when adults fail them." For a moment, Caroline looked as if she had been slapped by the truth, though Naomi had not moved an inch. Victor's patience ended. "The family is gathering," he said. "We are done." Caroline took the key card from the lock, backed into the corridor, and pulled the heavy oak door closed between them. Naomi lunged for the handle, but the bolt slid into place with a deep mechanical click. Darkness folded around her. On the other side, Caroline's voice came through the wood, smooth as silk over ice. "A good maid should know when to stay quiet." Footsteps faded. The music above grew louder. Naomi stood in the cold, one hand against the door, and for one terrible moment, fear nearly took the wheel. Then she looked up at the copper pipe running along the ceiling, and Lily's small voice from months ago returned to her memory. "3 taps means I can find you, right, Miss Naomi?" Naomi reached for the metal stand with trembling hands. "Find me now, baby," she whispered. Naomi lifted the metal stand toward the copper pipe, then stopped before the first strike. Panic wanted noise. Survival needed rhythm. She had one chance to make the house hear her, and in a mansion full of music, serving carts, polite conversation, and secrets, ordinary noise would disappear. She forced herself to breathe through her nose, slow and steady, the way she used to calm Lily when thunder rolled over the estate and the little girl buried her face in Naomi's apron. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. Not random. Not fear. A message. Before she struck the pipe, Naomi looked around the cellar for anything else that could help. Her phone was in the staff locker upstairs, because Caroline insisted no phones be carried during formal dinners. The wall phone near the door had gone dead the moment Victor left, either disconnected or controlled from another panel. The keypad beside the lock glowed red, refusing every number Naomi could think to try. She pressed Dominic's birth year. Nothing. Lily's birthday. Nothing. Eleanor's wedding anniversary, which Naomi only knew because she had dusted the framed photograph in the East Hall 100 times. Still nothing. The house had become a perfect cage, built by a man who believed locks kept danger out, never imagining they could keep the truth in. Above her, footsteps moved across the ceiling. The dinner had begun. Naomi could trace the evening by sound alone. Mrs. Alvarez's shoes clicked quickly near the service pantry. The kitchen door swung open and shut with its soft pneumatic sigh. The pianist shifted into something slower, the kind of song chosen to make rich people feel sentimental before a toast. Then came Lily's laugh, small and bright, and Naomi's chest tightened so sharply she had to grip the table. She could not let that sound become the last innocent thing in the room. She closed her eyes and rebuilt the plan from the pieces she had heard. The child's medicine before dessert. Eleanor's tea after that. The emergency board papers waiting beside Victor's plate. Dominic cornered not by force, not by scandal, but by fear for the 2 people who made him human. That was the cruelty of it. Victor and Caroline were not attacking his empire first. They were attacking his heart, trusting that a father would sign away anything while holding a sick child and watching his mother fade into confusion. Naomi opened her eyes. No. She would not let them turn love into a weapon. She dragged the tasting table closer to the pipe, climbed carefully onto its lower brace, and raised the metal stand. Her hands trembled from cold and fear, but her aim was sure. The first strike rang through the pipe, thin but clear. The second followed. The third echoed longer, vibrating through stone, wood, and whatever hidden paths ran beneath the floors. Naomi waited. Nothing. The music kept playing. She struck again. Once. Twice. 3 times. Her palms stung. Her shoulders ached. She imagined the sound climbing through the kitchen wall, under the marble, past the dining room floor, searching for the one child who would know it. Upstairs, a toast began. Victor's voice floated down, smooth and proud, praising loyalty, family, and the future of the Hayes name. Naomi almost laughed, but it came out like a broken breath. She struck the pipe again, harder this time. Once. Twice. 3 times. A pause. Then, faintly, from somewhere far above, the music faltered for half a beat. Naomi froze, listening with everything in her. A chair shifted. A little girl's voice said something she could not make out. Then Dominic Hayes spoke, low and careful, and the entire house seemed to hold its breath. Dominic's voice did not rise, but it reached every corner of the dining room. Everyone stop. The pianist lifted his hands from the keys. Forks paused above plates. The soft warmth of the room seemed to drain into the marble floor. Lily sat beside her father with the spoon still waiting inches from her mouth, her eyes fixed on the space beneath the table as if she could see through stone. Dominic set the spoon down carefully beside the medicine bottle, not spilling a drop, not looking away from his daughter. "Say that again," he told her. Lily swallowed. "That is Miss Naomi's knock." Caroline laughed too quickly. "Sweetheart, you are nervous. It is only an old pipe." Lily shook her head. "No." 3 taps, then a pause, then 3 taps. "She does that when I am scared." Dominic turned his head slowly toward Caroline, and the laughter in her face disappeared by degrees. "Where is Naomi?" The question sounded simple. That was what made it dangerous. Mrs. Alvarez stepped forward from the service doorway, hands folded tightly in front of her apron. "Sir, she went downstairs for the Bordeaux." Dominic's eyes moved to the empty place near the sideboard where the wine should have been waiting. "How long ago?" Mrs. Alvarez hesitated. "Maybe 20 minutes. The air shifted again. Dominic looked at Victor. "You sent her?" Victor spread his hands in a gesture of calm surprise. "I asked for the wine you requested. Nothing more. Staff delays happen, Dominic. We should not alarm your daughter over household confusion." Lily reached for her father's sleeve. "Daddy, do not make me take it yet." That small sentence did what no accusation could have done. It cut through the room and found the part of Dominic that money, power, and reputation had never hardened. He placed one hand over Lily's and pushed the medicine bottle farther away. Victor noticed. Caroline noticed. Eleanor, watching from the far end of the table, lifted her chin with the quiet instinct of a mother who had seen storms gather around her son before. "Dominic," she said softly, "listen to the child." Tap. 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 This time the sound was clearer, rising through the floor beneath the dining room like a heartbeat from under the house. Several guests looked down. One of Dominic's men near the wall touched his earpiece, waiting for instruction. Dominic stood. No one else moved. He turned to Mrs. Alvarez. "Bring me the cellar log." Then to his security chief. "Check every camera from the lower level for the last 30 minutes. Caroline stepped forward, her voice smooth but strained. "Dominic, this is embarrassing. Your family is here. Your advisors are here. Are you really going to interrupt dinner because a child imagined a game?" Dominic looked at her then, fully, coldly, the way he looked at men who confused his patience for blindness. "My daughter does not imagine people she trusts calling for help." The room went silent. Victor closed the folder beside his plate with 2 fingers. "This is becoming unnecessary." Dominic's gaze dropped to the folder. "So is that paperwork." Victor's face remained composed, but the skin around his eyes tightened. The security chief returned first, holding a small tablet. He did not speak aloud. He only angled the screen toward Dominic. The footage showed Naomi entering the lower corridor with the key card. It showed Caroline following 7 minutes later. It showed Victor entering through the utility passage 1 minute after that. Then the camera outside the wine cellar went black. Dominic watched the dark screen for 3 seconds. When he looked up, his face had changed into something quieter than anger and far more final. Caroline whispered, "The camera failed." Dominic stepped away from the table. "No," he said. "Someone needed it to." Lily rose from her chair, frightened but certain. "Daddy, please find her." Dominic touched her hair gently, then turned toward the service hall, his voice low enough to make every person lean into the silence. "Nobody touches that medicine. Nobody leaves this room." Dominic moved through the service hall without hurrying, and that made everyone behind him more afraid. Men who had followed him through boardrooms, courtrooms, and midnight negotiations fell into step without speaking. The security chief walked at his left, tablet in hand, rewinding the footage again and again, searching for the missing seconds that had turned into darkness. Mrs. Alvarez followed several steps behind, pale with worry, clutching the cellar logbook against her chest. Downstairs, the air grew colder with every turn of the staircase. The sounds of dinner faded until only Dominic's shoes on stone remained. Tap. 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 The noise came again, clearer now, not from the dining room floor but from the pipe running along the lower corridor. Dominic stopped beneath it. For the first time that night, something moved across his face that was not control. Recognition. Memory. Months earlier, he had come home early and found Lily laughing near the pantry while Naomi stood behind a half-open door, tapping 3 times on the wall so his daughter could find her. He had stood unseen in the hall, watching Lily run into Naomi's arms as if the young maid were sunlight at the end of a dark room. He had told himself then that it was harmless. A child's game. A servant being kind. Now that same game was calling from beneath his house like a warning bell. "Open it," Dominic said. The security chief reached the wine cellar door and scanned his MasterCard. The keypad flashed red. He tried again. Red. Mrs. Alvarez stepped forward, voice trembling. "That should not happen, sir. Your access overrides every lock." Dominic looked at the dead camera above the door, then at the keypad. "Unless someone removed this door from the system." From inside, the tapping stopped. A voice came through the wood, thin, hoarse, but unmistakable. "Mr. Hayes?" Dominic stepped closer. "Naomi." There was a pause, and when she spoke again, she did not ask to be let out. She did not cry about the cold. She did not defend herself. She said, "Do not let Lily drink the medicine." The word struck the corridor harder than any shout could have. Behind Dominic, Mrs. Alvarez covered her mouth. The security chief went still. Dominic placed one hand flat against the oak door, his jaw tightening in silence. "What did you hear?" he asked. Naomi's voice shook, but every word came through sharp enough to cut. "Victor said the child's dose before dessert. Miss Eleanor's tea after that. He said once you were scared, you would sign control to the emergency board. Caroline knows. She locked me in here. They made it look like I came down for the Bordeaux." Dominic closed his eyes for one beat. Not because he doubted her. Because every detail landed. Exactly where it should not have been able to land. The emergency board papers. The medicine bottle. Eleanor's tea service waiting upstairs. Caroline's sudden concern about embarrassment. Victor's calm hands on that folder. Dominic opened his eyes, and whatever softness had lived there for Lily hardened into something colder than the cellar air. "Get this door open." The security chief signaled 2 men forward with tools from the maintenance room. There was no chaos, no shouting, only the controlled sound of metal working against hidden machinery and Dominic standing close enough to hear Naomi breathing on the other side. When the final bolt released, the heavy door opened inward with a deep groan. Naomi stumbled into the light, shivering, one hand wrapped around the metal stand, the other pressed against the doorframe to keep herself upright. Her palms were scraped from the pipe, her uniform dusty, her face drained of color, but her eyes went straight to Dominic. "Lily," she whispered. Dominic removed his suit jacket and placed it around her shoulders before anyone else could move. The gesture stopped the corridor. Naomi stared at him, stunned by the weight of the warm fabric, by the quiet care from a man the whole city feared. Dominic looked down at her, not as staff, not as a witness, not as someone beneath his notice, but as the only person in his house who had told the truth before it was safe. "She has not taken it," he said. Naomi's knees nearly gave out with relief. Dominic caught her arm gently, steadying her without making her feel small. Then he turned to the security chief. "Bring the bottle, the tea, and the folder to the dining room." Quietly. His gaze moved back toward the staircase. "Let them finish their performance." Dominic returned to the dining room with Naomi walking beside him beneath his black suit jacket, and the effect was immediate. Conversation died before he reached the table. The candles kept burning, the silver kept shining, the untouched plates still carried the warmth of dinner, but the room itself seemed to understand that the evening had crossed into something no etiquette could repair. Lily saw Naomi first. She slipped from her chair and ran toward her, stopping only when she noticed Naomi's pale face and trembling hands. "Miss Naomi," she whispered. Naomi bent slightly, forcing a smile through the cold still trapped in her body. "I am here, baby." Dominic did not correct the closeness. He did not tell Lily to return to her chair. He placed one hand lightly on his daughter's shoulder and guided her behind him, where Mrs. Alvarez waited with open arms. Caroline stood near the fireplace, her face arranged into concern so quickly it almost looked real. "Naomi," she said softly, "thank goodness. We were all worried. What happened to you?" Naomi looked at her, and for the first time that night, she did not lower her eyes. Victor rose slowly from his seat, smoothing the front of his jacket. "Dominic, before this becomes dramatic, may I suggest we take the staff matter somewhere private?" Dominic walked to the head of the table and picked up the small amber medicine bottle. He held it between two fingers, studying the label as if it were a business card from someone already condemned. "Staff matter," he repeated. Victor's smile did not move. "A misunderstanding, most likely. The cellar is old. Doors stick. Panic creates stories." Dominic set the bottle down beside Victor's folder. Then the security chief entered silently and placed 3 items on the table in perfect order: the medicine bottle from Lily's tray, the silver tea tin prepared for Eleanor, and Victor's leather folder. The guests stared, confused, but no one asked a question. Dominic opened the folder. Inside were transfer documents, emergency authority forms, and financial authorizations prepared with tabs marking every place his signature was supposed to go. Eleanor leaned forward, her frail hands tightening on the arms of her chair. "Victor," she said, her voice low with disbelief, "why would those be ready tonight?" Victor gave a small sigh, as if disappointed by everyone else's lack of sophistication. "In our world, preparation is not betrayal. Dominic knows that." Dominic turned one page. "This says the emergency board assumes control if I am medically or emotionally unable to manage family assets." Victor's eyes flickered. Standard language. Naomi's voice came from beside the sideboard, quiet but clear. "He said you would sign once you were thinking like a father." The words settled over the table. Caroline gave a brittle laugh. "She was locked in a cold cellar. She is confused." Dominic did not look at Caroline. He looked at Lily's medicine. "Then let us remove confusion." He nodded to the security chief, who lifted a phone and played the restored hallway audio from the lower level. The recording was faint, damaged by distance, but Victor's voice came through just enough. "The child's dose. Eleanor's tea. He will sign." Caroline went perfectly still. Victor's hand closed around the back of his chair. Dominic stopped the recording before it could continue. He did not need more. Neither did anyone else. The dining room became so quiet that the candle flames sounded alive. Dominic finally turned to Naomi. "Tell me the rest." Caroline stepped forward. "You cannot possibly allow a maid to accuse your family at your own table." Dominic's eyes moved to her, and the temperature of the room seemed to drop. "My family is the child you tried to use, the mother you tried to weaken, and the woman you locked underground because she had more courage than anyone sitting here." Caroline's lips parted, but no words came. Naomi gripped the edge of Dominic's jacket around her shoulders, not hiding, not shrinking, and began from the beginning. Naomi's voice did not become loud, and somehow that made every word heavier. She told them about the cellar, about Victor's voice behind the wall, about Caroline standing in the doorway with the key card in her hand. She repeated the phrases exactly as she had heard them, not polished, not dramatic, just true. The child's dose before dessert. Eleanor's tea after that. Emergency authority. He will sign anything once he is afraid. With each sentence, Victor's calm expression lost another layer. Caroline kept her chin lifted, but the diamonds at her wrist trembled against the stem of her wineglass. Dominic listened without interrupting. That was the part that frightened the room most. He did not defend himself. He did not ask Naomi to prove her worth. He let the silence do what power often failed to do. It made people reveal themselves. When Naomi finished, Victor placed both hands on the table and gave a measured nod, as though accepting an unfortunate delay in a meeting. "Dominic," he said, "you are allowing emotion to guide you." This young woman overheard fragments through a wall. She has built a story around fear. Around loyalty to your daughter. Admirable, perhaps, but not reliable. Dominic looked at him. "You picked the wrong word." Victor blinked once. "Which word?" "Reliable." Dominic turned toward Mrs. Alvarez. "How many people in this house know Lily refuses medicine unless the spoon is warmed first?" Mrs. Alvarez looked confused, but answered. "Only the household staff, sir. And Miss Naomi. She is usually the one who warms it." Dominic nodded slowly. "And how many people know my mother stopped drinking chamomile tea because it made her dizzy last spring?" Eleanor's eyes narrowed. Mrs. Alvarez whispered, "Very few." Dominic's gaze returned to Victor. Yet tonight, chamomile was placed on her tray. The security chief stepped forward and set a second tablet on the table. On the screen was kitchen footage from earlier that evening. Caroline stood near the service counter, speaking quietly with one of the temporary servers. Victor appeared seconds later, placing a small white packet beside the tea tin before covering it with a folded napkin. No one in the room moved. Victor's face hardened. That footage proves nothing without context. Dominic opened the medicine bottle and held it toward the security chief. Then context will arrive from the laboratory. He placed it back on the table without letting Lily near it. "Until then, nobody in this room touches anything prepared for my daughter or my mother." Caroline finally found her voice. "You are humiliating me in front of everyone because of her." She pointed at Naomi, and the gesture broke whatever patience Dominic still had left. He stepped between them, not quickly, not violently, but with such finality that Caroline's hand dropped by itself. "No," he said. "You humiliated yourself when you thought a woman's uniform made her truth smaller." The word struck the room and stayed there. Naomi looked down at Dominic's jacket around her shoulders, then back up at Caroline. For 11 months, she had swallowed insults because her mother needed medicine, because her brother needed tuition, because survival often asked decent people to become quiet. But tonight, quiet had almost cost a child her safety. Naomi lifted her chin. "You were right about one thing," she said. "People do notice stories quickly. A missing bottle. A desperate employee. A locked door. But you forgot something. Caroline stared at her. Naomi's eyes stayed steady. Children notice who loves them without wanting anything back. Lily slipped from Mrs. Alvarez's arms and walked to Naomi, taking her hand in both of hers. The dining room watched a little girl choose the maid over the woman who had tried so hard to replace her. Dominic looked at that small joined pair of hands, and in his face, something old and frozen began to break. Dominic watched Lily hold Naomi's hand, and the decision inside him became very simple. For years, he had believed protection meant higher walls, better locks, sharper contracts, quieter staff, men posted at every door. Yet the only thing that had protected his daughter tonight was the woman everyone had been trained to look past. He turned to the security chief. Seal the house records. Preserve every camera file, every access log, every kitchen entry, and every message sent from this property in the last 24 hours. Victor's posture changed. It was not fear exactly. It was the first physical sign of a man realizing the room had stopped belonging to him. Dominic, be careful, he said. There are reputations involved here. Dominic's eyes did not move from him. Yes. Yours. The words were quiet, but the silence afterward made them feel enormous. Caroline stepped back toward the fireplace, her hand searching for the edge of the mantel as if marble could steady her. This is absurd, she said. I came here to join this family. Eleanor stood slowly from her chair. The movement was small, but it commanded the table more than any raised voice could have. A family is not something you enter by moving the weakest person out of your way. Caroline looked at her, wounded pride flashing across her face, but Eleanor was not finished. I have lived long enough to know the difference between love and possession. You wanted my son's name. Naomi wanted my granddaughter safe. The room absorbed the words like a verdict. Mrs. Alvarez quietly removed Lily's plate, cup, and spoon from the table and placed them on a separate tray for testing. Another staff member did the same with Eleanor's tea. The ordinary domestic gestures somehow made the accusation more real. This was not gossip. This was not drama. This was evidence wrapped in porcelain and silver. Victor tried one last time. He reached for the folder, but Dominic placed one hand on top of it first. Do not. One word. Victor froze. Dominic opened the folder again and turned the pages toward the table. These documents were prepared before dinner. Before any emergency. Before any doctor was called. Before my daughter was even given her medicine. He tapped the signature line with one finger. You did not prepare for a crisis, Victor. You prepared for my grief. Eleanor closed her eyes. Lily pressed closer to Naomi. Caroline whispered, he told me it would only make them tired. He said nobody would be seriously hurt. Victor turned toward her, and for the first time all night, his polished calm cracked. Caroline. The name came out like a warning, but it was too late. Dominic looked at Caroline, and she seemed to understand that her own voice had opened the door Naomi had been locked behind. She covered her mouth, eyes shining, not with remorse yet, but with the shock of consequences finally becoming personal. The security chief gave Dominic a small nod and spoke into his earpiece, requesting law enforcement and medical testing through private channels. No one rushed. No one shouted. That made it worse for Victor. He had expected panic. He had counted on emotion. Instead, he stood in a room where every exit had become polite and impossible. Dominic removed Caroline's engagement ring from the small velvet dish near her place setting, where she had left it before dinner because it felt too tight. He set it beside the folder. You will leave this house tonight with nothing that carries my family's name. Caroline's lips trembled. Dominic, please. He did not soften. You locked an innocent woman in the dark because you thought her life weighed less than your ambition. Then he turned to Victor. And you mistook access for loyalty. Outside, faint blue and red lights began to flicker beyond the tall windows, washing the white roses in cold color. The guests remained seated, stunned into silence. Naomi did not celebrate. She only looked down at Lily's small hand wrapped around hers and let herself breathe. For the first time since the cellar door closed, the air felt warm enough to enter her lungs. The lights outside the windows painted the dining room in slow flashes of blue and red, but inside the Hayes mansion, nobody moved until Dominic did. Law enforcement entered through the front hall with quiet professionalism, followed by 2 medical technicians carrying sealed testing kits. The sound of their shoes on marble felt less like an interruption than an answer. Victor Mallory stood beside the table, still dressed like a trusted advisor, still wearing the suit he had chosen for a victory dinner, but the room no longer saw him that way. Caroline remained near the fireplace, one hand at her throat, her face pale beneath the chandelier light. No one shouted at them. No one needed to. The evidence sat between the candles, the folder, the bottle, the tea tin, the restored audio, the access logs, and the woman in Dominic's jacket who had survived the dark long enough to bring the truth upstairs. Lily would not let go of Naomi's hand. Even when Mrs. Alvarez wrapped a blanket around the child's shoulders, Lily kept her fingers locked around Naomi's palm as if the 3 taps had tied them together forever. Eleanor crossed the room slowly, each step careful, and stopped in front of Naomi. For 11 months, Naomi had brought this woman tea, folded her shawls, polished the silver frames that held old family photographs, and stepped away before anyone could thank her. Now Eleanor reached for both of Naomi's hands and held them in her own. "You saved my granddaughter," she said. Naomi shook her head, overwhelmed. "I only did what anyone should have done." Eleanor's eyes glistened. "No, dear. Many people know what should be done. Fewer are brave enough to do it when it costs them something." The words moved through Naomi more deeply than praise. She thought of the cellar door closing. The cold stone. Caroline's voice telling her to stay quiet. Her mother's prescription bottles lined up on a kitchen counter in a small apartment across town. Her brother's textbooks stacked beside a second-hand laptop. Every reason she had learned to lower her eyes. Every bill that had taught her silence. Then she looked at Lily, safe and breathing beside her, and understood that dignity sometimes begins as a whisper no one expects to hear. Dominic turned from the officers after giving his statement. His face was composed, but his eyes were different when they found Naomi. Not softer in a weak way. Clearer. As if the night had stripped away a lie he had not known he was living with. He walked to the head of the table, where the guests, staff, and family still stood frozen between fear and relief. "This house was built on rules," he said. "Tonight, those rules failed because they taught us to measure people by where they stood, not by who they were." He looked at Naomi, and the room followed his gaze. Naomi Carter stood in the lowest room of this house and became the highest honor in it. Naomi's breath caught. Dominic stepped closer, removed the jacket from her shoulders only long enough to fold it properly around her again, this time with both hands, in front of everyone. "From this moment on, no one here will call you just a maid. You are family under this roof, and your name will be spoken with respect." The room went silent. Not the cold silence of fear from before, but something heavier, cleaner, almost sacred. Mrs. Alvarez began to cry quietly. One of Dominic's men lowered his eyes. Eleanor smiled through tears. Lily wrapped her arms around Naomi's waist and whispered, "I found you." Naomi bent and held the child close. "No, baby," she whispered back. "You heard me." Hours later, after the guests had gone, after the evidence had been taken, after the roses in the foyer had begun to wilt beneath the weight of the night, Naomi stood near the grand staircase with Dominic beside her. The mansion felt different now. Not safer because of locks. Safer because truth had finally walked through it without lowering its head. Dominic looked toward the cellar stairs, then back at Naomi. I thought I knew every danger in this house, he said. Naomi's eyes stayed steady. Sometimes danger sounds polite. Dominic nodded once, accepting the lesson. And that night, beneath crystal lights and cold marble, the Hayes family learned that respect is not given by power, purchased by wealth, or protected by locked doors. It is revealed in the moment someone unseen chooses courage anyway. And that day, the world remembered what dignity looks like.